So sexual union is so important. As John Paul II said, it is the sacrament of the bridegroom and the bride. And also John Paul II said in his Theology of the Body that it is all of marriage that constitutes that sacramental sign. So washing the dishes, rubbing the feet, whatever it is, going on vacations, but especially the conjugal union, this is a sign that launches us into that mystery of the bridegroom, Jesus Christ, and the bride is church. It's an analogy, and as John Paul II also says, it's the least inadequate analogy. No analogy is adequate to describe the mystery of Christ's love for his church and the mystery of heaven and all that, but it's the least inadequate. It means it's the best we got, okay?
Yeah.
And so it's very important to understand that that's why it's so pleasurable at times. But it's also to understand that's why it can be so difficult and intense, is because there is almost no other area in marriage in which the reality of giving yourself away and exchanging yourself with the other is so intimate and so vulnerable. And it demands a reduction in selfishness and objectifying the other totally. It is the training ground for self-giving love.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this episode of The Catholic Gentleman. We are your host. I am John Heinen. We also have Devin Schadt. He's a speaker. He is an author, a great friend of mine. Devin, how are you doing today?
Doing all right. I'm excited about this topic.
Yeah, me too. And I think that's to start with, just a warning for our listeners, right? We're going to be talking about some adult content today. And I think it's really important that, at least a heads up is given, because we're talking about sex, and we're going to be talking about that which is most pure, which is most beautiful. We're not going to be casual or flippant about it, but I think it's so important because so many men have reached out to us. I mean, impossible to count the amount that have reached out to us with these concerns and with these issues. And so that's what we're going to be discussing today. But in particular, we're going to be discussing how to speak with your wife about sex. So if you like what we're talking here on the public edition of the episode, we're actually going to answer questions from our listeners on the inside of Catholic Gentleman Plus today. We love getting your questions. If you send them to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com, there's a chance that we're going to play them here on air. I also want to thank our show sponsor, that's Exodus 90. Their event has started. Their big 90 days to transformation and liberation and freedom for men has started on January 20th, but it's not too late. We'll talk more about that later. And so finally, I was looking inside of Spotify. I was looking inside of Apple. And it's interesting how so many of our listeners, actually over 70% of our listeners, have never subscribed to our show. And so if you could do us a big favor, I'm just going to ask you to hit that subscribe button, and you know who you are. And what it's going to do is it's going to help the algorithm reach more men. And we're so grateful for you listening. We're so grateful for all of our Catholic Gentleman Plus listeners and supporters, and we just want this to get to more men. So if you hit that subscribe button, that will help do that. So we're going to start right into this now. We are going to be talking about something very serious and very intimate on the lives of so many of men, actually all married men, right? This is so fundamental. It's often filled with emotions, with misunderstandings, with previous hurts and traumas, with our own limitation, and definitely with Satan's all-out war against marriage. And so who expected this to be as difficult within marriage as it actually is? I know I didn't. I was led by the culture. I was fed by the culture. It was all going to be, carefree and honeymoon experiences for the rest of my marriage, but that's not at all the case. And so, Devin, love to hear from you while we're kind of setting the stage here, an approach that you want to make sure our listeners understand.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of us go into marriage thinking that it's going to be a big, especially as men, it's her hormones are firing, our hormones, our testosterone levels are firing and high. And we think that both the libidos are going to match for all eternity. And then there's a little bit of, after child one, child two, there might be a change, or there could be a drop in testosterone in the guy, and maybe his libido changes. There's a lot of different factors that can take place, but there are reasons why this is so intense, and in fact why it can be such a tenacious kind of obstacle or problem, even though it's meant to be the path to union. And I think one thing we want to perhaps caveat this with is that marriage is not a means to sex, but sexual intercourse is a means to a great marriage. Okay. So we just want to kind of set that in its place right there. And so what we're, at least for me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we're going to do here is we're going to focus on how to discuss sex with our spouses, as men to wives, if you're listening to this, maybe with your husbands. But we're not going to tell you in this episode how to practically have better sex, how to have more sex, although that could be a direct consequence of discussing sex with your spouse.
Yeah, I think that's right. So if you're tuning in thinking, hey, I'm going to have better sex, I'm going to have more sex, you're not on the same wavelength of us in this episode. We really want to talk about have meaningful conversations with your wife about something that matters so much to marriages and matters so much to our lives as men, and is, yes, please.
Which will consequently cause you to have an incredible marriage, which will consequently allow you to have better sexual union.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that it's important for us to just kind of lay that out, right? So without going into too much theology, I do think it's important to say that your marriage union is a sacrament designed to get you to heaven. It is a sacrament that is this sacred sign instituted by Christ, right? Which you confer on each other. The husband confers it, or the future husband confers it upon his future wife, and vice versa. This sacrament, is it begins at the nuptial vows, but it's not ratified. It's not fully complete until it's consummated by the first sexual act. And that is really important to understand, that the church in her wisdom, that Christ in his wisdom that he imparted upon the church, understood that the sacrament of marriage would find its completion, would find its fullness in sexual intercourse. And so that's why it's so important. And that's why Satan just absolutely despises this for a couple that is engaged in the conjugal act, fancy word for sex, when they're engaged in that. When in the state of the grace, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, you're growing in grace, you're growing in holiness in that. I mean, that's so huge, and that's so intimate, and it's so mind-blowing. I grabbed a quote here from Alice von Hildebrand, where she said, because the intimate sphere of sex differs radically from other bodily instincts, such as hunger, it was bound to be deeply affected by original sin, as well as to go directly against Satan and what he is trying to achieve. And so I think it's so important, just kind of setting the stage to lay that out. Devin, any final thoughts before we jump into this first point?
So sexual union is so important. As John Paul II said, it is the sacrament of the bridegroom and the bride. And also John Paul II said in his Theology of the Body that it is all of marriage that constitutes that sacramental sign. So washing the dishes, rubbing the feet, whatever it is, going on vacations, but especially the conjugal union, this is a sign that launches us into that mystery of the bridegroom, Jesus Christ, and the bride is church. It's an analogy. And as John Paul II also says, it's the least inadequate analogy. No analogy is adequate to describe the mystery of Christ's love for his church and the mystery of heaven and all that. But it's the least inadequate. It means it's the best we got. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's very important to understand that that's why it's so pleasurable at times, but it's also to understand that's why it can be so difficult and intense, is because there is almost no other area in marriage in which the reality of giving yourself away and exchanging yourself with the other is so intimate and so vulnerable. And it demands a reduction in selfishness and objectifying the other totally. it is the training ground for self-giving love, the sexual act in marriage. And so that's why it's so important. But scientifically, and I just
Please.
scientifically, dopamine, oxytocin, which is the feel-good hormone about the love drug, closeness and intimacy, endorphins, testosterone, prolactin, serotonin, all this is released during the sexual act. So like CNN of all people had this article where it talks about the 10 benefits, like boost mood, it decreases stress, improves sleep, boosts immunity, decreases prostate cancer in men, improves
Wow.
heart health, enhances intimacy in the couple, boosts cognition, offsets pain, lowers your cortisol levels. I mean, so sex, God has designed it chemically to benefit us, but he's also designed it relationally to benefit us, because little r relationship, the human r relationship of marriage, leads to the eternal r relationship of the Trinity. So that's just kind of my 2 cents there, is how
I love
important
it.
this is.
It is. This is big deals, and that's why it's so important for us to be talking about this and not avoiding the conversation because it could get uncomfortable or it might be off-putting to others, right? I think about St. John Paul II, and I know that when he came out with Theology of the Body, or really 129 talks, 134 to be exact, but 129 that he was giving to the public at the beginning of his pontificate, it was because he knew how important this was after having mentored and counseled so many married couples, that this was what the Spirit was moving him to discuss. And so he was willing to do that for the sake of souls, for the sake of love, and for the sake of bringing more into the eternal abode of heaven. And so we have identified 7 points that are going to help husbands to work through, grow in grace and holiness, to love your wife above all earthly things, and to be the example that the world needs, so that you can have conversations about sex that are meaningful, that are not off-putting, and that can help you get on the same page as your spouse, so that you can, again, be that example for the rest of the world. So I did grab another little quote, St. John Chrysostom. This is actually in Catechism of the Catholic Church, where he says, "I have taken you in my arms, and I love you, and I prefer you to my life itself. For the present, life is nothing, and my most ardent dream is to spend it with you in such a way that we may be assured of not being separated in the life reserved for us. I place your love above all things, and nothing would be more bitter or painful to me than to be a different mind than you." And so that is his counsel to young husbands and what they should be thinking. And I would say through all of marriage, reminding yourself, what can you do to give of yourself more perfectly to your spouse? So with that being said, the first one that we wanted to talk is always remember the goal. So that's the first point, is always remember the goal of these conversations. And Devin, why don't you lead us in the beginning of this one?
Yeah. So the goal is not sex. If the goal is sex, you shouldn't have gotten married, because that's not what the purpose of marriage is. Not sex. Sex fulfills the purpose, or helps us to fulfill the purpose of marriage, which is unity, a unified, thriving, intimate marriage that honors God. And so it's kind of the idea of the difference between indirect and direct ends, right? So in a sense, you might think that the direct end is sexual intercourse and the indirect end is God, that the direct end of sexual intercourse is meant to lead you to the indirect end, but actually God is the direct end, and sexual intercourse is at the service of that. So guys, it's so important that you get this right in your head, because if you don't, that's when you feel like you're going to explode, because the temptations are so great, or you haven't had intercourse in a while, and your wife isn't communicating to you or finding you attractive, you think, and you're just like, you can't take any more. You have to remember that all of this is at the service of making your marriage incredible and unifying the two. So it's meant sometimes when you're having sexual dysfunction or sexual challenges, it's meant to launch you into conversation purposefully. That's the intent behind it. God wants to get you talking, because communication leads to communion. So it's all about the goal of you having an incredibly intimate relationship, marriage, which is based on communication.
Men, it is not too late to join Exodus 90's journey leading up to Easter. I think of the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. You know, the story where the owner went out frequently throughout the day and kept on pulling in laborers. Each of them received an abundance of blessings, regardless when they went to work. So don't push this off. This year, Father Boniface Hicks is leading it, and he is an incredible spiritual director. There are already over 40,000 men journeying together. You know what? If you don't have a group, they've got that covered as well. They will connect you with one inside. So please don't push off your freedom. Don't push off creating a deeper and more lasting relationship with Christ in the life of purpose that he wants you to have. So head over to get.exodus90.com/gentlemen or click on that link in the show notes to get started for free today. If you stick with this, you are going to be a new man. You are going to be transformed, and you are going to be glad that you did. God bless. I like it. And I would say that love, the pinnacle of love within marriage can be achieved within the sexual act to some degree, but our goal is eternal love in heaven. And love is not something that is given to couples, right? It's not something that we just happens to us, right? It's actually a calling and it's a task. It's something that we actually have to work through. It's actually something that we have to commit ourselves to living out fully. And so I'm so glad that we're talking about this first, that the goal is unified, thriving, intimate marriage that honors God now and for all of eternity. It's not just to have sex and to get more sex, right? And so we have to remember that goal, that it's all about loving your wife truly, the whole of her person, and sharing in this greatest, marriage possible, which is achievable. And we've seen it. We all, hopefully you have examples in your life of people that just have thriving, phenomenal marriages, and they're in their 70s or 80s, right? And so it's not based on sex. It's absolutely based on that love and that self-giving that they practice and they work towards and they refined throughout life to achieve this glorious example later in life. And you can achieve that now. And I think that's what we're trying to get at. I don't want it to seem like it's something that is distant and in the future, but it's something that can actually be lived and experienced now, even if it feels like that's impossible. And I guarantee you, Devin and I have both experienced this in our own marriages where sometimes it just felt impossible, right? But that's absolutely what Satan wants you to think. That's absolutely what emotions will cause you to experience and to even feel. But trust us, love prevails. And as long as we keep some of these things in mind, we are also going to be walking in God's grace.
Great. Yeah, absolutely.
So always remember the goal. The goal is not sex. And so,
but sex can be a means to the goal.
Agreed. Exactly.
So
That's sex.
We have to put it in its place and see it as it is. If sex was the end goal, then we would be having it all the time. But we're not. We have marriage all the time.
That's right.
Sex can be a highlight in the marriage.
Excellent.
But it's not the marriage itself.
Excellent. So the second one that we want to talk about is engaging in non-accusational conversations about sex. And I'm just going to add often. I think that it's really important to do this often, non-accusational conversations about sex. And I want to start and just say, maybe you are not there and you need to pray about that, right? Maybe when you reflect on having a conversation with your spouse about sex, it's going to be directly pointed at her. And maybe it has been directly pointed at her so frequently that she can't actually receive it in any other way at this time. And that's something that we need grace and we need to be working through, because it can be possible and it needs to be delicate. But the point is that you have to prepare your conversation in a non-accusational way. And so you have to actually set forth of what are the do's and don'ts of this conversation? What are the things that I'm going to be addressing, and how am I going to be addressing them? And what are the things I'm going to be avoiding? So Devin, maybe what are some examples or what are some general guardrails for men to follow?
Well, first, I think that this could instill a lot of trepidation and fear in a lot of people.
That's the truth.
Oh my goodness, I've got to talk about sex with my spouse. Yes, you absolutely have to. And I personally know many couples who haven't. And so by the time they're in their midlife years or menopause years, it kind of, I mean, I'm not saying it's too late, but sometimes it is too late because they've drifted so far apart because they've never talked about this. And one has wondered what was wrong with the other, or when did the other not find me attractive? And just had a conversation with another gentleman, like he stopped having intercourse with his wife for a particular reason. He didn't tell her why. She thought it was because she was unattractive and he didn't love her. And that wasn't the case. And so if you do not talk about this, wires get crossed, signals are misinterpreted, and your marriage will start, two ships passing in the night, you will start to drift away from one another. So that's the first thing is, yes, you're going to be afraid. And the reason the fear is there is because this is so important. The reason that you feel that trepidation is because God's calling you to get out of the boat and actually overcome your fear and talk about this with your wife because it's essential, or with your husband because it's essential. So I think just a couple of things. When I've talked with my wife about sex and my desire for it, well, and that's another mistake. It's not a desire for it. It's always a desire for her, or
Ooh,
for, you know,
excellent.
it's so important because if you say it, she immediately, or he immediately says, oh, you just want it. You just want to use me. You don't want me. Very important. But when we're talking about sexual encounter, it's so important that we come to it not saying, well, you do this and you do that. No, the idea here is this is who I am, how I feel, how I react sexually. So these are kind of the things that are going to come up. Sexual desire. How much of it do I have? Not how much don't you have? You don't have sexual desire. No, it's how much sexual desire I have, how much interest I have, how much libido, how much sexual attraction is there. Get the conversation going to discuss these things, because what is it? What do they say in the in these movies where, spoiler alert, guess what? You're not the same. You're not the same. And so you're not going to, if you do, great. You're one of the few, but your libidos are not going to match. Your sexual attraction is not going to match. Your sexual desire is not going to match. So the two of you have to discuss this to figure out where the other is at. And without that conversation, you don't really know her. Or on her side, you don't really know him. You can say you know your husband all you want, but if you are not talking about sex with him, finding out where his libido is at, his sexual attraction, his desire for that, if you don't know those things really deep down, if you haven't heard it from his lips, you don't really know him. Vice versa, right?
Yeah.
Very important.
I think it is. It's so good. And I like that you talked about us not being the same, because that's really what I was attached to. And that's why I actually say often. So I've been married for 15 years, praise God. And I'll say that it gets so much easier to have these conversations because you know each other, as long as you're responsibly committing to this often. It was not that way for many years within our marriage. And we were even well-formed and instructed, and we had resources that we could reach out to. We had a lot of family friends that would be open to having these conversations with us. But the point is that you're getting to know each other, and you're getting to know everything from wounds to experiences. And chances are they haven't had these experiences before. And so they're figuring this out too, right? We came at it with this sort of cultural worldview, right? Both of us, even though my wife has degrees in theology and we understood, the manner of it. But when you actually start experiencing it, it's shocking how difficult it is, right? And how distant from what you imagined it would be. And so approaching that with that understanding and approaching that with that, non-accusation is going to, and frequently, and by frequently, I guess I'm thinking, to be responsible, this is something that you come to, maybe once a month, maybe, it's not every single night. That would get exhausting. And, but that's, I think, an essence of having these non-accusational conversations. And I would also say that, practically speaking, the time in which you have these conversations is also really important too.
Oh, that's a great point.
Because if it's in the the middle of her cycle, when her hormones or pheromones are going off, that's a horrible time to talk about.
Or another horrible time is when, let's say whoever's the driver wants intercourse and the other one is resisting or does not
Yes.
want it, and then that's not the time to talk about, because emotions are going to be too high. The one who doesn't want to on defensive, the one who does want to on the offensive, and I mean to be offensive. So
Yeah.
it's not the right time when it's volatile like that. So what a great time, in my experience, is go out on a date, go for a walk.
Yeah.
When things are good in your marriage, or if they're not good in your marriage, well, then acknowledge that. I mean, just go,
Yeah.
hey, babe, I know things aren't good, but I want to talk to you or I don't want to talk. I want to have a conversation with you in a non-blaming, non-accusational way. Can we try that? And I think, like, I remember Jordan Peterson talking about this. Like, he said, you're going to get it wrong the first 50 times.
Yes.
But you have to stay the course, because it's that 51st or 52nd conversation where there's a breakthrough, and this is how we talk to one another. And guys, so important. If you go in with the blame hat, if you go in with the accusational card, she is not going to trust you. And if she doesn't trust you, she's not going to open up about how she really feels about sex, how she really feels about you, and it will go nowhere. It will just go south. So it's so important that you just take, okay, no blame, no accusation. I'm just going to talk about how I feel about myself and about my need. This is very important. If you start talking about her, it's over.
That's so true. Bring the Holy Spirit into that conversation before you start. I think that is so important to bring the grace in that is so desperately needed. And we're kind of working through this, and I do think it's good for us to just move on to the third point, because the third point so perfectly is wedded into the second point. And
Nice,
and that's
John.
that. You know what? I didn't even prepare it. These things just come to me. So express your sexual needs, but be kind, merciful, and patient. I grabbed another quote from St. John Paul II, where he said, "We must never forget that only when love between human beings is put to the test can its true value be seen." And so this is what's happening here, is that love is indeed being put to the test. And so we have to express that, but we have to come forward with this understanding of what are the virtues that I need to be begging God for, and that need to be in play in this conversation, and what are the vices that I'm going to fall into, right? And when we're thinking through those things, we can come off as less accusatory and blaming, and we can just be very honest about some of the biological realities, as well as some of our misconceived notions entering into marriage, or misconceived notions based off of previous experience with our spouse, etc. And we just have to be honest within that. We have to be vulnerable, but at the same time doing so in such a way that is understanding, and again, that is patient within the conversation and the structure of the conversation.
Yeah. We don't know the inner dynamics a lot of times of our spouse. So what I mean by that is, time and time again, I hear these stories of people who've been married for like 10 years, and then something triggers one of them where they're brought back to when they were abused sexually or raped, or there was just like, or the mom or the dad just always talked about how dirty sex was and how awful it was. And so all of that, we have to remember that there's so much going on in the other person, in our spouse. And I mean, in our life, it was my wife's mom who just always talked about sexual intercourse is something very dirty, perverted almost. And so my wife, basically like looked at it through that lens, like, well, it's pleasurable and it's great, but I have to be careful because it's so dirty. And so she started associating with sin or sinful behavior, right? And that's sick and that's wrong. And it was so beautiful, because when the theology body came out, it was liberating for us.
Wow.
Just for him. But there's other people, like, where they're so wounded from their youth that to engage in sex just triggers all of that. And so that's why this communication is so important in a merciful way, because mercy, literally in the Latin, it comes from the Latin root word merces, I believe, and merces actually means to pay the price. And so if I'm being merciful to my wife, in her woundedness, I'm trying to pay the price of what has been done to her. I'm trying to pay that price with Jesus to free her and liberate her. And it's very important that if you're having trouble paying that price and being merciful, then by all means, get a therapist, go together and work through that. But this is the good news. There is tremendous hope and healing, because even if one of you have been abused, even if somebody's been raped, even if there are those wounds, with Christ or with God, as the psalm says, there is the fullness of redemption and healing. Nothing is beyond him. He can go to the depth of that wound, and out of those wounds, glory can shine. And that's what we see in Jesus Christ. I mean, the wounds symbolize or are the sign of death, and yet he overcame it in his body. Christ can do the same for us by the gift and the power of the work of the Holy Spirit in our sexuality.
So good. And I would say that when framing yourself before and praying before this conversation is assume the best of your spouse. If you enter into this conversation not assuming the best of your spouse, but having these preconceived notions of how they're going to respond and why they're doing what they're doing and all of those sort of things, you've immediately set up this conversation as enemies against each other, instead of, mutual loving spouses that are working together to give to each other to achieve eternal happiness, right? Going back to the goal. And so when you approach things like that, and actually it just occurred to me, when you approach things with an expectation of what you're going to get out of it, that's also can be a concern as well. So like if you approach this conversation with like, we're going to have this conversation, then I'm going to get more sex, you're missing it. You're missing the mark, right?
That's one of the 7 right there. That's
exactly.
One of the 7 is have no expectations.
Exactly. And I think that all within this is, assume the best of your spouse when you move forward within this conversation. And I just wanted to say that because when you do that, and maybe you haven't, I do want to speak to those men who've tried having these conversations and their wife has felt objectified by these conversations, right? You've got a lot of work to do. You've got a lot of prayer and yeah, Devin, what are you saying? What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's both sides.
Sure.
Sometimes it's her fault too, because she's shutting down because of woundedness or because of fear of pregnancy or because she just doesn't like to have intercourse very often because of vaginal pain, whatever. So we gotta, remember, guys are in a tough spot here, because if they are like 80% or 75% of men, they want to have intercourse often. And if their wife is resisting conversation, even though he's being sincere in that, that's a very difficult situation for him. So back to your point, though, which is very important, this idea of assumption. You said,
assuming the best. Yeah.
So false assumptions. So assumptions lead to accusations, because if I think I'm assuming you're just holding out, then I'm going to eventually accuse you one way or another, my body language or what I say. So assumptions lead to accusation, and accusation leads to separation. So we have to build trust. And the way to build trust is through mercy and patience. So it's like, honey, just tell me where you're at. Tell me basically, where you're at with sexuality, where you're at with us. And I am going to listen, and I'm not going to make any judgments here.
Listen.
And I'm going to just, because man, the thing is at the beginning of the episode, we even made the mistake. I think we said, we're going to teach you guys how to talk about sex. No, we're going to teach you how to listen.
I love it.
We're going to teach you how to discuss it, which means there's a both and,
I'm so glad that you brought up listen, because listen was in my head, and then not assuming the worst or, or approaching it with your wife as a partner, not as an enemy. Listening got removed from my brain. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I do think that is fundamental. It is. It's fundamental in these conversations, is that you approach with a listening ear, that you're approaching with an attempt to learn, an attempt to understand, realization that might not happen initially within first conversation or first of many conversations, but that through constantly bringing God's grace in and having these conversations, the possibilities become it transforms, the conversation transforms, and that which is expressed starts to make sense and starts to click. And so I think that's so important that we are here bringing forth a listening ear, not a
2 years.
litany of, yeah, exactly, not a litany of blames, accusations, or concerns, within it. So
Exactly.
it
Yeah,
was so good.
exactly.
Moving on. Yeah, moving on to the fourth one here. Understand sexual desire as a God-given need and gift. We've
Mm.
talked about this on other episodes, but it is such a really important point. A sexual desire is a God-given need and gift. It is something that is just so beautiful, so overwhelmingly powerful, that creates with it such depth of belonging and unity, that to not see it as a God-given need and gift is to see it unrightly. And very often we've kind of, ooh, it's gross. It's like you were saying earlier, we kind of miss that. So Devin, what are your thoughts right away on number 4 here?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, there's just so much. But I think that when we reject sexual union or the glory of sexual union, or that it is designed by God, God wants us to have sex. I mean,
Yes.
he designed us to have sex. He wants that for us. And he wants it to be intimate and pleasurable because it is probably one of the most unifying, chemically speaking, and mentally and psychologically and spiritually speaking, things that we can do in our marriage. That's why it's so special. That's why you don't do it all the time. It's that powerful. Okay. So to see it as perverted, or to see it, and the reason why we see it perverted is because the culture has conditioned us this way. And we're going to get to this later, but we've just got to be careful that we don't go into marriage or are in our marriage thinking that we should be having intercourse the way that it's done on porn videos. That's
Sure.
absolutely perverted. Sex is something very unifying, very self-giving, and the whole point of the sexual union and removing your clothes off, we're going to get really literal here, by removing your clothes, by giving yourself to another, it is total vulnerability and development of trust. It is
Yeah.
total self-giving. It is the closest thing we have on this earth to being fully exposed in a proper way and giving yourself. You get this right, you really get everything right in your marriage. You get this wrong, you'll get everything wrong in your marriage.
That's
This is
right.
so important.
It is. They were naked without shame. Adam
There
and
you go.
Eve.
Boom.
When Adam first saw Eve, he rejoiced, right? Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He rejoiced and seeing her feminine beauty. And we have, please.
John, you just nailed something. This is not to condemn anyone, but if you are experiencing shame when you're taking off your clothes, if you're experiencing shame in the conjugal act, there is something wrong. Okay, there is something deeply wrong, and it's not a condemnation. It's just a signal that it's time to get help, which means don't go to sex therapists. They'll screw you up, seriously, like the worldly ones. You can go to a Catholic therapist by yourself or with your husband, and that's fine. No group therapy. But all I'm saying is it's a sign that you need help. And so it's time to talk about that with your spouse, because just personal experiences, when we got past the shame and we're able to disrobe and share ourselves with one another without that shame, without that guilt, without that fear, that's when everything changed in our entirety of our marriage. Everything from praying with one another, having great discussions with one another, eye contact with one another. Now we could actually look into the other, and there's no more like, I don't want to let you in. I'm afraid that you'll see something in here. Now it's like, no, Christopher West, intimacy, into me, see. It literally is intimacy, see into me. That's the whole idea of it. So yeah, man, it's a God-given gift for this very reason. He wants us to have divine intimacy in our marriage.
That's right. I'm glad that you brought up seeking counseling and mental health, because that is something that I do agree with as well, that there is those possibilities and those situations, that's a better word, that require that and that can greatly benefit from that with a good Catholic counselor, a good Catholic therapist
Yes.
that can help you and your spouse. And so don't shy away from that possibility if that's you in your situation. And one way that you can kind of discern this is a point that we have here is that, a point within a point, it's not the new one, but
Okay.
both spouse need to agree on this, right? If you and your wife aren't agreeing that our sexual desires and our sexual attraction is God-given, it's a God-given need and it's a gift. If you guys don't agree on this, it could be something that, hey, maybe you're a situation, honestly, like my wife and I, where we can just grab books and we can just start reading about it and we can have conversations about it. That's something that we're very blessed and capable of doing. That being said, I don't know a ton of people like that. And so, yeah. And so maybe though, that is something that you can do. And awesome, grab a couple good books, shoot us an email, podcast@catholicgentleman.com. We'll give you some good books. And you can do this, but you both have to agree on that together. If we're not on the same page on this, that it is a God-given need, that sexual attraction is good, it is holy, it is of God. If we're not on the same page as this, all the other stuff's not going to work. All the other stuff's we're not going to get right, and we're going to just be speaking over each other, or we're not going to be communicating effectively.
So good. That is so good. Yes. And so when we're communicating our sexual needs, this is very important. We must communicate first off that they are God-given needs, right? The sexual need is God-given. There's no perversion in the authentic need. Now we discuss your need and my need. Where is your level of need in this area? Where is my level of need in this area? Okay, we're not even here. We're not balanced. Okay, that's when the great conversations and the intense conversations, you have to go through hell to get to heaven. That's when the difficult conversations occur, because most likely you're not going to be aligned. Okay. So, one's sexual desire and need may be greater, far greater than the other. Okay. How is it? And that brings us to
the next point.
Number five, right?
I'm glad you said that.
After you understand your spouse's sexual need, you understand your own need, you understand the levels. That's where the two of you, without coercion, blaming, pouting, whining, invoking the marriage debt and guilting, basically the two of you on your own figure out how to creatively, purposefully, intentionally address the other's authentic God-given need in this area. And it's so beautiful because let's just say, okay, so my wife is at a different time in her life now. She's gone through menopause and all that. And my desire for sexual intimacy, just being full disclosure here, is greater, right? Yet it's so beautiful because she understands it. We've discussed that. She knows that about me. I know where she's at. And yet then when I see her attempting to address my need, no human being could ever satiate or fulfill another human being's need. Only God can for love, right?
Amen.
But when I see her purposely, intentionally, lovingly trying to address that need, oh my gosh, it speaks to me of love. I'm like, she loves me so much, because even though this isn't like at a high need level for her, what is for us to have a great marriage. And so she wants to give herself to me. And that's when your marriage just becomes explosive in the beautiful way, is because you're like, oh, she's going literally out of her way, out of herself, intentionally, purposely trying to give herself to me. I want to do the same for her.
Yeah, that's the reciprocity of self-giving love right there. It's intuited, it's experienced, it's something that it doesn't have to be calculated, but it is beautiful. And I think I know you're exactly right that when this happens, when these situations happen, when we do this for our spouse, they receive that as well. When you address, number 5, right? When you address your your wife's needs, you listen to what they are without a quid pro quo sort of, intent to, but out of love, like to really fulfill that need within her. And let me just pause right there, because men, we're really good at manipulating and we're in a position of authority as well in our relationship. And so that can be really frightful. That can be really difficult. And if your wife is feeling, I guess, afraid of you, this is something that that is missing the point, and that can come across when we're talking about addressing your spouse's needs with coercion, with blaming, with whining, all of these things that we talked about, because when you're doing that, again, it's for some end that is not
She
the
feels that.
purpose, and
She
she
feels
feels it.
that.
And so I come back to what you were stating, Devin, which I think is so great, is that when both spouses are on this page and both spouses are looking to address the needs and are emotionally capable in that moment, whenever it is to do this, it's just a beautiful, powerful thing, and it's motivating to the other to reciprocate and to do the same, and that's when beautiful marriages really begin to unfold and continue to do so.
Yeah. If you want her to respect your authority, don't abuse it. I mean, she won't respect you if you're abusing it, if you're just dominating her. On the other hand, now this is very important, we address it. There are a lot of guys who suffer from being married to wives who, I'm sorry, they just won't have intercourse with their husbands.
Yep.
They don't think that they should, they don't think they have to, they don't think it's necessary, and that's a tremendous cross for a man. It's just a tremendous cross for a man. And so, if you look at the Blessed Mother on the road to Calvary, this just came to me, but why did Simon the Cyrene get involved? If you do the Stations of the Cross, the way we have it is Jesus meets his afflicted mother on the road to Calvary. And the very next station is they press Simon of Cyrene and take it up the cross of Christ. What's going on? Mary is praying for Jesus that someone will help him. She's the exemplar of the bride to the bridegroom. So if you're a great wife, or you're going to be a great wife, you need to be doing what Mary is doing, is how can I relieve my husband of his cross? Because that's where we get into the next one, which is addressing lust, because every man struggles to battle lust. And frankly, a wife is to help her husband to work through that at some level. It does not mean she's an outlet for his lust, but she cannot also be the cause of it. And there are some women who turn this around on the husband and say, well, I don't want him to lust, therefore I'm not having intercourse with him. No, that is absolutely wrong. No. But she can help him by being a gift to him. And if he's being a gift to her, that can help him to be, I'm so safe and trusting in this relationship. This is so beautiful. I have no need for anything else. You know what I mean?
So good.
Yeah.
I do. And I would say that that's why in the order of our points, we talk about it being a God-given need and gift. And we got to get on the same page with that, because then it makes sense that it's this God-given need or gift, and we live in a sex-saturated, pornified culture. We have grown up in that. We have these false expectations. We have this misunderstandings. We ourselves don't understand our bodies, let alone our spouse's body. And so when we start entering into this, it can be overwhelming. It can be like mind-numbingly impossible to see through these things. And so, and it is because of not only the culture, but also the depth and the power and the beauty of this gift and its ultimate end, right? Which is what we're trying to get to here. So we've talked about this. I'm just going to say, because we discussed this, that on episode 136 and on episode 139, both Lust, Sin, and How to Win, as well as What Women Don't Understand About Men, we had these two episodes that we discussed this within it in more depth and in more in-depth. And I think it's important I'll put those links in the show notes if you want to go into it. But it's important, and I do appreciate you bringing up, it's not always the man's problem, right? It is definitely, we are men speaking to other men. And so that's our podcast, that's our show. But we need to be real. Wounds and traumas that a spouse, our wives can inflict upon their husbands is very true and very painful and very a real thing for some men to.
But here's the error. What we do with that is we play the victim, and then what we say is, well, that's why I use porn, or well, that's why I'm having the affair, or that's why I've turned to men, or whatever it is, and that, my friend, is wrong. That, my friend, is a massive error, because not only you're allowing one abuse to lead to another, that's not the answer. but maybe perhaps by seeking the Lord, maybe perhaps by being steadfast with him, and then, like we said earlier, communicating with your wife, trying to have these conversations, taking her on dates, eventually maybe God's going to give the grace for the two of you to come to the center
True.
on this.
True. There's a point here that we talked about. I like to talk about custody of the eyes, right? Men battling lust and stuff like that. And one of the biggest benefits to that is custody of the eyes, is controlling what you're allowing in, right? Controlling custody of the senses, as it comes up throughout church fathers and in our church teachings. But custody of the eyes is controlling what we let in. And I have found in a very beautiful way, if I'm being honest, that the more strict I am on controlling, like when I'm billboards or even grocery store checkout magazines and stuff like that with these half naked women on stuff, the more that I control and I keep myself from a gaze and an impure or potentially, occasion for that, the more my gaze is affixed and focused on my wife, and the more beautiful it is. Properly, I know it's gorgeous.
Because when you're looking at the magazine in the rack or whatever, the billboard, and then you go back to your wife and you look at her improperly. Anyway.
That's right. And now imagine the situation where our wife is not giving us something to look at, or giving us that gaze to be attracted to, or giving us that which we can gaze upon more appropriately. That is another wound. That is another battle. That is another struggle. And so by God's grace, that is not something that is in my marriage. And I'm so grateful for that, because that reciprocal union that we were just talking about is something that my wife has expressed. She's like, I don't know why you find me so attractive. I don't know why and I'm not doing it out of anything but love. Like really, it's a very authentic and very true statements that happen. But she can sense that because I'm focusing my gaze properly.
Yeah, it's great. And ladies, if you're listening, this is not, I'm not saying that, I caveat this, I qualify this by saying this does not mean I believe that men should lust, they should not, or whatever. But if you don't give your husband something to look at, he's going to look for that something somewhere else. Unfortunately, if he is not a man of grace, or if he's even a man trying, if he's a man trying to be a man of grace, he's going to struggle not to look somewhere else. And so it's so important, and that's why God has allowed, as you say, John, marriage to be a remedy for concupiscence, but not an outlet for it. We're to help one another so that we can defend ourselves and build up that defense against lust, you know? And so when you have one another and you know you're loved by the other and you have this trust in which you can give yourself to the other, the lust factor becomes very minimal. I mean, it's still there, like low level white noise, but it's not nearly as intense.
Absolutely. So if you want to discern more on that or listen to more about that, check out one of those episodes that I'll put the link in the show notes. But the last and final point that we think, and I'm glad that it's included here, is don't give up. I said you have to return to this often. We have to approach it with love, approach it with respect, approach it with patience and all those humility and all those necessary virtues. But we need to continue and move forward on this, because if you don't, the world has won. If you don't, Satan has won. If you don't, your marriage is absolutely going to continue to go further. You're going to separate further and further apart. Your marriage is going to struggle more and more. And the fullness that your marriage can be for yourselves and for this world is going to be diminished into non-existence. And that is exactly what we have to avoid.
Yes, perfect. So what is hidden, make it known in your marriage, meaning bring it out, talk about what's in the dark places. Otherwise, because God's going to bring it to light one way or another. And two signs that you're not doing all of these things, two signs is really resentment and resistance. So you will resist the other in conversation. You'll resist the other in their needs and their wants, and you'll resent the other in just the way you think about them. And if you feel resistance or resentment regarding your spouse, it's really time to pray to God for the strength to overcome your fears and really talk about this and communicate. Because and I really believe this, fundamentally, why marriages go south is because one or both of the spouse's needs are not being addressed. It's that simple. It's that simple. So we have to continue the conversation. We have to be courageous enough to continue to get in there, because if you're not talking about now, you'll be talking about in divorce court.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. And so we want you to avoid that. So please keep us in your prayers. I think that's important. Keep us in your prayers because you are in our prayers. I pray for our listeners all the time. And so I want you to please do the same. I ask that of you, right? Just keep us in your prayers.
So, John, do you think we should just give them like the 3 points about how to just begin the conversation?
Absolutely. No, I think that's great. And I might have an extra one to throw in, but yeah, why don't you set the stage with how to begin the conversation here?
So guys, sometimes it's difficult for us to actually address this. And because, we might feel shame, or we might feel insecure, or we don't want to feel insecure and we don't want to feel shame. So we want to avoid it because it's very difficult. But I think this is almost like an initiating rite in a way. I think by talking about sex with your wife and your need in this area, it can help you to become a real man, because the more conversations you have about it without blaming and accusing and whining and complaining, man, you're just becoming more and more of a man. So how to begin the conversation practically? So I think the first thing is you don't go about saying, "Hey, baby, I think we need to practice more," or we haven't had in a while. I'm kind of, I'm feeling like I'm gonna blow up. That's not going to work. Okay. So I think the first thing is I think you need to demonstrate the fact that you're in this for the right reasons. I love our marriage, and I want it to be even better. I love you, and I want us to love each other even more when we're in our 50s and when we're in our 80s. And so our marriage, besides God, is number one to me. Okay, so that to me is the first thing is look, my marriage is so important to you. I love you so much, but I want it to be the best it can be. I want it to be great, So then I think then the second point is to realize that there's so many aspects to marriage, but just acknowledge, look, I want our marriage to be great. And there's so many components to our marriage, but sexual union is one of the most important ones. And so I think we need to talk about it, And then I think the third thing is then intentionally schedule it, find a way. But the two of you, maybe it's a weekend getaway, maybe it's just date night, or maybe it's just, okay, we go for a walk 3 times a week. Can we do this and talk about how we could even have a better sexual union? Can we talk about your needs, my needs in this area in a very loving, charitable, merciful way? And so I really think that's the way to begin this.
No, I appreciate you bringing those up. Yeah, the last one is actually what I was just gonna. You phrased it in a similar way that I was going to bring up, was that approaching the conversation, addressing your wife's needs first in this manner.
Good.
And
Good.
so
First.
when you place her needs first with a listening ear, with a desire to love, with that openness to grow in an understanding of her sexual needs or her relational needs, the more beautiful and the more appropriate and the better the conversation is going to be. But when I always go back to that manipulation aspect. When we go at it with this intent to kind of manipulate or get something our way, you just got to cut that out. You just got to get rid of that, because
you might get what you want once or twice, but long run, that well is going to run dry.
That's right. Exactly. And it's certainly not the holy, loving way of approaching these things. And so we're so thankful that we got to this point in the episode where we've gone through these 7 points, and we hope that you got a lot out of it. But let's just reflect on those 7 points one time that you can then go back and take a listen to, or you can just set back and think through and reflect on this yourself. And so that first point that we talked about is always remember the goal. And the goal is not sex, but sex can be a means to the ultimate goal, which is that eternal reward and that eternal union with our Father God in heaven. The second point is engage in non-accusational conversations about sex and do so often. The next point is express sexual needs. Be kind, show those virtues. Be kind, be merciful, humble, patient, loving, understanding. All of these sort of things getting to the heart of the issue. Number 4, understand sexual desires as a God-given need and gift. And this is a really big one. If we're not on the same page for this one, we're never going to get to the next points and probably wouldn't have gotten past the previous points. Number 5, address your spouse's needs. And for us as men, we have to remember this. It's me first tendency. It happens to us all. We are in a position of authority, but we need to set forth and look to understand more deeply our spouse's needs. And those needs change. Those needs change throughout life. And there's different varying factors. And so it's important to have that conversation and do so often. Number 6, we talked about addressing lust. We've talked about this in previous episodes, but it is so important. We live in 2025, but it doesn't even matter. Like, this is just a natural part of man, right? I don't mean to express that only today do we experience this. This is a history of mankind. And so number 6 is that. Then number 7 is don't give up, right? Continue to pursue with God's grace, continue to reflect and discern, continue to grow in that relationship with your wife that God wants you to have, that we want you to have, that's possible to have, and that the world needs you to have, whether they admit it or not. And so anyways, Devin, any extra thoughts on those 7 points?
That's perfect.
Awesome. So glad that we could discuss it. I'm so grateful, Devin, for this conversation. If you like what we're talking about, I would encourage you to head over to Catholic Gentleman Plus. That's a great way to support us. We also go into these extended editions of the episode like we're going to do today. We've got 2 listeners' questions very much on these issues here that listeners have sent us that we're going to answer inside of Catholic Gentleman Plus. If you have any questions, send them to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. Now, for the end of the episode here, we always have that section of putting on the new man. This is the challenge for the week. And so what I would like you to do is I'd like you to have this conversation with your spouse. If you're a married man, this is the challenge, right? Focus here. I was going to say suck it up, but I want to be cautious, but I want you to be a man and I want you to do it. I want you to have this conversation with your spouse. Think through how to do this, think through how to approach this, and go at it without any sort of expectations or preconceived notions other than the willful desire to grow in love and in intimacy with your spouse, with your wife.
Great.
Awesome. Well, Devin, thanks so very much for the conversation. Thanks so much for our listeners. And as we end each of our episodes,
be a man, be a saint.